In the heart of Siberia, far beyond the last human settlement, something impossible has been waiting. Older than history, larger than imagination, and not entirely silent. The journey into white silence. The snow was alive. It moved, twisted, screamed in the wind like a wounded animal. Through the blizzard, a figure in a heavy parka fought to stay upright, leaning against gusts that could strip the heat from bone. Ice clung to the fur around her hood, to the lenses of her goggles. She lifted a trembling hand and wiped the frost away, just enough to see a shape looming ahead. It was massive, too angular to be natural. It jutted from the white earth like the spine of something ancient, sleeping under the snow. She stumbled toward it, brushing the frozen crust from its surface, stone, smooth and impossibly straight. In the heart of Siberia, far beyond the last human settlement, something impossible has been waiting. Older than history, larger than imagination, and not entirely silent. Elena Markova wasn't supposed to be here. Not according to her department at the Institute, not according to the Russian government, and certainly not according to the Evenki elders of the village she had left behind 3 days ago. They had warned her, their faces drawn in the dim light of a cabin hearth. The oldest man in the group had leaned forward, the fire painting his deep-lined face in orange and shadow. That land, he told her, voice low and certain, does not like to be walked upon without permission. You will not find what you seek, or worse, you will. But Elena had come anyway. She always did. She was chasing something that lived halfway between archaeology and obsession. The Soviet-era map was folded inside her coat, its corners soft from years of handling. On it, just north of the Arctic Circle, a set of crude coordinates had been marked with a spiral symbol, hand-drawn in faded ink. It wasn't any symbol she recognized from her work in archaeology, but she had seen it before. Once, buried deep in a classified photo collection she had no permission to view, it had been carved into the side of a massive stone, covered in ice. It was why she was here. The journey. The last human outpost was a cluster of rusting huts and fuel drums half buried in snow. Beyond it stretched the Siberian wilderness, an endless white ocean of wind and ice, punctuated only by the black spines of distant tree lines. Her snowmobile snarled against the cold, each breath from the exhaust freezing instantly in the air. Her guide, Semyon Petrov, sat ahead on his own machine, a hunched silhouette against the pale horizon. The Evenki man was older than he looked, his weather-lined face almost hidden behind the fur of his hood. On the first day, the silence was clean, sharp, almost beautiful. By the second, it began to press in like a weight on her skull. Even the wind didn't seem to make sound. Here, it hissed, yes, but somehow that hiss was absorbed into the void. The second night, they camped beside a frozen river, its surface cracked in jagged veins that groaned under their weight. The fire popped and spat, casting weak shadows on the walls of their tent. Semyon said little, staring into the flames as if trying to read something written there. When Elena finally asked why he had agreed to guide her, he only shrugged. "Some roads," he said, "should only be taken once. I will not take this one again." The third day, first sight. The tree line broke near midday, opening into a plain so vast the sky seemed too small to cover it. The snow here was deeper, more treacherous. Twice they had to dig their machines free. By the time the sun was sinking toward the horizon, its light a cold, pale gold, Elena saw them. Shapes, half buried, rising in a long, deliberate curve. Not jagged, not random. Each stood at an angle so precise it seemed calculated, aligned, almost like sentinels. She cut the snowmobile's engine, and the silence swallowed them whole. Approaching on foot, she realized just how enormous they were, each stone the height of a two-story building, their edges too straight to be carved by weather alone. And under the thin sheet of frost, she thought she could see lines, carvings, patterns. Semyon stopped several paces behind her, his breath forming slow clouds in the air. "These are not for us," he said quietly. "They are for the ones who come back." Elena turned toward him, snow crunching under her boots. "Come back? You mean—" "I mean they are waiting." She looked at the stones again. Waiting. The thought was absurd, yet something about them felt patient, not dead relics of a long-vanished people, but watchers. Elena reached out, brushing the frost away. Beneath her glove, the stone was ice-cold, but for a moment, she felt a faint pulse, like a heartbeat. We thought we had found the ruins of an ancient city, but as night fell, we learned the stones were listening. The wind had died by nightfall, leaving a stillness so complete that every shift of the snow underfoot seemed to echo across the plain. They set up camp just beyond the largest stone, careful to keep their tents inside a shallow depression where the ice offered some shelter from the cold. The fire crackled in the center of their little encampment, a fragile pool of warmth and light against the darkening wilderness. Above, the stars blazed sharper than Elena had ever seen, burning cold in the black sky. They made the stones look almost luminous, as though the frost itself had begun to glow. Semyon avoided looking at them. He kept himself close to the flames, hands outstretched toward the heat, eyes fixed on the snow as he muttered softly in his native tongue. Elena listened for a while, catching only fragments, words for stone, memory, and song. When she asked him about it, he paused, considering her with a look that was equal parts wary and resigned. "My grandfather told me of this place," he said. "He called it the Field of Builders. He said they came before the first reindeer, before the rivers had their names. They carved stones so tall the sky bent to meet them, and they sang to the land." Elena leaned closer. "Sang?" Semyon nodded. "The stones remember their song, and sometimes they hum it to those who stay too long." He said it so matter-of-factly that for a moment Elena almost believed him. She wanted to laugh it off, but there was something about the stillness here, something that pressed in on her chest, like the air before a thunderstorm, that made the idea feel less absurd than it should have. Later, when the fire had burned low and Semyon had crawled into his tent, Elena stepped outside again. The air was sharp enough to sting her lungs. She turned toward the nearest stone. Its face caught the moonlight, revealing faint grooves beneath the frost, spirals repeating over and over until they vanished into the frozen surface. She reached out, brushing her glove against the stone, and felt it again, that strange, tingling vibration. Not constant, but pulsing. Slow. At first, she thought it was her imagination, some trick of blood rushing through her hands in the cold. But then it deepened, faintly at first, like a bass note thrumming through the earth. She pulled her hand back. The sound didn't stop. It grew louder, though not in the way normal sound did. It wasn't carried through the air. It was inside her head, resonating against her skull. It was low, rhythmic, almost melodic. She took a step back, heart pounding, eyes scanning the shadows between the stones. The hum faded for a moment, replaced by another sound, software almost delicate, like the crunch of snow under something light. Her head turned sharply toward it. There, between two monoliths, movement, a shadow that didn't belong to any stone. She squinted, but the moonlight caught nothing solid. The sound came again. Step, pause, step. Closer now. Elena! She spun around, breath fogging the air, but Semyon was still in his tent, the fabric unmoving. The voice hadn't come from him. It had come from the dark. The hum surged, filling her head until she felt it in her teeth. Her eyes darted between the stones, searching for the source. Then she saw them, tracks in the snow, leading from the far edge of the formation toward her camp. They weren't fresh enough to be melting, but the edges were sharp, the details clear, and they weren't boot prints. The shape was wrong. Longer, narrower, the arch strange and deep. The front ended in points instead of rounded toes. She crouched beside one, the frost crunching softly beneath her weight. It was nearly twice the length of her own foot. She could see the ridges of skin, as though whatever made it had walked barefoot in the snow. Another step sounded behind her. She turned again, but this time nothing moved. The hum began to recede, and the cold air rushed back into her awareness, as if she had just surfaced from underwater. When she returned to the fire, her hands were trembling inside her gloves. She glanced toward Semyon's tent. "Did you hear that?" There was no answer. She hesitated for a moment, then unzipped the flap. The inside was empty. His bedroll was still there, but Semyon himself was gone. The stones loomed over her in the moonlight, silent now. Somewhere far out in the dark, the crunch of snow sounded again. Elena stood frozen in place, the silence around her so thick it felt almost physical. The snow under her boots had settled into stillness, but those other steps, they had come from somewhere just beyond the stones, somewhere she couldn't see. She forced herself to move, her breath shallow, the beam of her headlamp cutting sharp slices into the darkness. The prints she had seen earlier stretched away from camp, weaving between the megaliths in a loose trail. Each one was clear, undisturbed by wind. No snow had drifted into them. She followed, careful, each step sinking deep into the crusted layer. The cold gnawed at her face, but her focus locked on the tracks. How they seemed almost human, but not quite. They were too elongated, the arches unnaturally high, the toes tapering into points that left strange, claw-like impressions. She told herself they could be animal tracks distorted by melting and refreezing. She told herself this even though the temperature hadn't risen above freezing in weeks, and no animal she knew of could leave something like this. The trail led toward the largest stone of all, a slab so tall it seemed to pierce the night sky. Its base was half buried in snow, but as she drew closer, she saw something unusual. A ring of bare ground around it, perfectly circular, as though the snow had been burned away. She stepped into the ring, and instantly the air changed. The cold was still there, but muted, dulled, as if she had stepped into another climate entirely. The hair on her arms rose under her coat. Her compass, dangling from her jacket, began to twitch. She lifted it into view. The needle spun, not lazily but violently, like a clock in panic. She turned it this way and that, but it didn't matter. It kept whirling, never finding north. Beneath her boots, something hard shifted under the thin crust of ice. She knelt, brushing it aside with her gloves, until her fingers uncovered a carved groove in the stone beneath. She traced it with her hand, following its curve until she realized it formed a spiral. The same spiral she had seen on the map. A gust of wind rattled the hood of her coat, but she realized quickly that it wasn't wind. The air here didn't move. This sound was different. A slow, deliberate intake, followed by a faint exhale, like breath. Elena! Her head snapped up. The voice had been close, too close. She swept her headlamp across the space between the stones, her pulse thudding in her ears. The beam caught nothing but the pale shimmer of frost. Her mouth was dry. Semyon? No answer. A faint shadow shifted at the edge of her vision, darting between two monoliths. She whipped her light toward it, but whatever it was had already vanished. She stepped out of the ring, crunching through the snow, moving toward the gap. And then she saw them. More tracks. Dozens of them. Some overlapping, some circling the stones, as if whoever, whatever, made them had been here a long time, walking endlessly in patterns. She crouched to examine one and noticed something else. Faint heat radiating up from it, as though the snow in that spot had only just frozen over. When she finally returned to camp, the fire had gone out. Her breath fogged in the freezing air, but the camp felt wrong, too still. She approached Semyon's tent again, only to find it exactly as before. Zipped shut, his bedroll inside, but no sign of him. Her stomach tightened. She turned to scan the horizon, the beam of her headlamp sweeping over the empty plain. It caught the stones, the snow, and finally, something else. Half buried near the edge of camp lay a weathered canvas pack. She recognized it instantly. It was Semyon's. She lifted it, finding it surprisingly heavy. Inside, beneath spare clothes and a coil of rope, lay a bundle wrapped in old oilcloth. She peeled it back and froze. It was a notebook, its leather cover cracked and brittle with age. Across the front, stamped in faded Cyrillic, was a single word: Sekretno, secret. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were sketches of the stones, coordinates, and notes in hurried, almost frantic handwriting. But one page caught her eye, a crude drawing of the same spiral she'd found on the stone. And beneath it, in underlined text, a phrase she could just make out: not man-made. She turned the page, and there, tucked into the binding, was a photograph. Grainy, black and white, showing the very ring of stones she stood among now. But there was a figure in the photo, too, standing in the center, head tilted toward the camera. The face was blurred, but the shape, it wasn't entirely human. The wind picked up again, stirring the edges of the old photograph as she stared at it. The blurred figure in the center of the stone circle seemed almost to lean toward her, as though the distortion wasn't from the camera, but from the subject itself. She felt an instinctive urge to put it back, to close the notebook and leave it buried where she'd found it. Instead, she turned another page. The handwriting shifted here, tighter, almost cramped, as if written in a hurry. Each entry began with a date, the earliest from April 1978. April 4th, 1978. Field Unit Report Arrival confirmed. Coordinates match map provided by Central Directorate. Initial survey indicates unnatural stone formation, aligned with cardinal points. Structures too large to have been moved by primitive technology. April 6th, 1978. Anomaly recorded magnetic interference consistent. Compasses unreliable. Radio contact with base fading unexpectedly in clear conditions. Source unknown. April 8, 1978. Subjective perceptions. Team reports auditory phenomena, low-frequency vibrations, intermittent, perceived more strongly at night. Investigating possible seismic origin. The entries became erratic after that, sometimes only a few lines long, sometimes a half-page of rushed, uneven text. April 12, 1978. We have heard it clearly now. It is not wind. It is not earth-shifting. It is deliberate. April 13, 1978. Saw movement between stones. Shape indistinct. Size inconsistent with any known local fauna. Vasson believes it is human. It is not human. April 14, 1978. 2 men missing. The final entry was dated April 15th. The ink was smudged, as though the page had been wet when it was written. They are in the stones. They are the stones. No signature, no coordinates, nothing after that. The rest of the notebook was blank. Elena lowered the book slowly, her breath clouding in the cold. She had heard of this. Fragments of a Soviet expedition rumored to have gone missing under unfavorable weather conditions. It had been little more than a whispered cautionary tale in academic circles, often dismissed as conspiracy theory. But this notebook was not rumor. This was record, and Semyon had been carrying it. She scanned the horizon again, calling his name. Only the wind answered, thin and high-pitched now, threading between the stones like a distant voice. She turned back to the photograph, holding it close to the firelight. The blurred figure, yes, the head was wrong. Too narrow at the crown, the neck too long. And in the grainy image, its arm seemed bent at an unnatural angle, fingers, or something like fingers, pressed against the spiral carving on one of the stones. She glanced toward that very stone now. In the moonlight, its surface seemed darker, as though something wet had passed over it. The fire flickered and hissed. Elena froze. From the far side of camp came a sound. The soft scrape of something moving across frozen ground. Slow, deliberate. She reached for her flashlight, the beam cutting through the snowflakes drifting in the air. The edge of the light caught one of the stones, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw a shadow withdraw behind it. Her mind leapt to the pages of the notebook, to the line she couldn't shake. It is not human. She took a step toward the stone, her boots crunching in the snow. Another step. The hum began again, faint at first, then rising in volume until it seemed to fill her skull. She clenched her jaw against it, pressing forward until she reached the base of the slab. Nothing. Only the smooth, cold surface of the megalith and the frost clinging to its edges. But the hum didn't stop. It vibrated through her chest now, steady, patient, almost like breathing. She looked down. At her feet, pressed into the bare ground at the stone's base, was a fresh footprint. Not Semyon's, not hers. Longer, narrower, the pointed toes etched clearly into the earth where snow should have been. And next to it, half buried under a thin layer of ice, was something metallic. She crouched and pried it loose. The frost broke away to reveal a corroded Soviet insignia. The hammer and sickle still visible despite years of exposure. She turned it over in her hand, the metal biting into her skin with its cold. And then, from behind the stone, came a whisper, so close she felt the warmth of breath against her ear. Elena. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the excavation tent, a different storm had begun. Dr. Levin's hands trembled slightly as he turned over the artifact in his palm, a small, jet-black stone disc, perfectly circular, with a hole drilled in the center. The edges were serrated in a way that felt too precise for any primitive tool. But what made his stomach knot was the pattern carved along the rim, spirals within spirals, leading the eye inward toward a shape that looked disturbingly like a human eye staring back at him. "This isn't natural," murmured Elena, her voice barely audible over the rattling of the tent walls. She had been documenting every find so far, but now her camera hung uselessly at her side. "I've seen something like this before, in the restricted archives." Dr. Levin's eyes snapped toward her. "The archives?" She hesitated, glancing toward the entrance as if afraid someone might overhear, even though they were alone. "In Moscow. A collection of objects recovered from Siberia in the 1920s. The files said they were not to be discussed in academic circles. One of them was almost identical to this." A silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the wind carried a strange low hum, so faint that at first it seemed like a trick of the ear. But it persisted, rising and falling like breath. Levin put the artifact down, pressing his ear against the thin fabric wall of the tent. The hum was not coming from the storm. It was coming from below them. Suddenly, the generator flickered, lights dimming. The shadows in the tent lengthened, curling unnaturally toward the excavation pit. Levin grabbed a flashlight and shone it downward, only to see the dirt at the bottom begin to shift. Something beneath the earth was moving. "What is that?" Elena's voice cracked. Before Levin could answer, the ground in the pit collapsed inward, revealing a dark, yawning hole. The hum grew louder, vibrating in their bones. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a pattern, almost like language. And in that moment, Levin realized with cold certainty, whatever had built these structures had not vanished entirely. Levin's flashlight cut a narrow path into the darkness below, its beam swallowed almost immediately by the void. The hole was deep, unnaturally deep, and the edges of the collapse were lined with something that made his breath catch. It wasn't just dirt. Smooth, metallic-looking panels were embedded in the walls, their surfaces etched with the same spiraling patterns as the artifact. Elena leaned over, her knuckles white as she gripped the ladder they had lowered earlier for soil samples. "This doesn't make sense. The ice sheet over this region is supposed to be, what? Tens of thousands of years old. And this," she gestured toward the exposed structure, "looks like it's barely corroded at all." Levin didn't answer. His mind was spinning. This wasn't archaeology anymore. This was something else. Something that would never make it into a peer-reviewed journal. He swung the flashlight beam downward again, trying to see the bottom, but there was only darkness. And that humming, now clearer, its rhythm pulsing in a way that was both alien and disturbingly organic. Without another word, he began climbing down. The metal rungs of the embedded ladder were cold to the touch, slick with condensation. Every step echoed unnaturally, as if the walls themselves were amplifying the sound. Elena followed, her breathing fast and shallow. Halfway down, they passed a section of wall where the spiral carvings shifted in design. Instead of abstract patterns, they began to resemble constellations, maps of a night sky neither of them recognized. "Levin," Elena whispered, shining her own flashlight on one of the panels. That's not our sky. Those aren't Earth's constellations." Before he could reply, a faint light appeared far below them, a soft, pale blue glow, pulsing in time with the hum. It was moving, as if something alive was waiting for them. When they finally reached the base, Levin's boots touched an impossibly smooth floor. The glow was coming from a circular doorway ahead, its edges outlined in the same black stone as the artifact. No hinges, no seams, no way to open it. Yet as they stepped closer, the hum deepened, and the door slowly slid apart without a sound. Beyond it was a vast chamber, and at its center floated something that should not have existed in this world. The chamber swallowed them whole, its sheer size impossible to reconcile with the narrow shaft they had descended. The ceiling arched high above, vanishing into darkness. The walls curved in perfect symmetry, every inch covered in that same alien script, as though the room itself was a library of a language no human had ever spoken. And there, in the center, suspended as if gravity had been politely dismissed, was an object unlike anything Levin had ever imagined. It wasn't just floating, it was breathing. Each slow expansion and contraction sent ripples through the air, distorting the light. The pale blue glow emanated from within, pulsing like a heartbeat. As Levin stepped closer, he realized it wasn't a solid object at all, but layers upon layers of translucent plates, each one shifting minutely, reconfiguring itself in silence. Elena's voice trembled. "It's alive, or aware." Something in the air changed, an almost imperceptible pressure, like standing too close to a storm about to break. Levin's ears popped, and a strange whisper seemed to brush the edge of his mind. It wasn't in English, but somehow he felt the meaning. "You have come." He stumbled backward, shaking his head. "Did you hear that?" Elena didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the floating structure, wide and unfocused, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Slowly, without seeming to realize it, she began walking toward it. The hum deepened again, resonating in his bones. Levin's instincts screamed to stop her, but his limbs felt heavy, as though the air itself had thickened. Then, the thing opened. The plates parted like the petals of a metallic flower, revealing a core of pure light. It was blinding for an instant, and then the light softened, showing shapes inside. Not human, not quite. Figures suspended within, tall, elongated forms, their skin pale as frost, eyes closed, as if in sleep. There were 6 of them, arranged in a circle around an empty 7th space. The humming became a slow, resonant chant, though no mouth spoke it. And in that sound, Levin understood something terrifying. Whatever these beings were, they weren't gone. They were waiting. The air felt charged now, thick, electric, almost metallic on the tongue. Levin's pulse hammered against his ribs, each beat syncing with the low, rhythmic hum flooding the chamber. Then, it happened. One of the 6 figures shifted. Not much, just a twitch of the hand, a slow, deliberate unfurling of impossibly long fingers. The movement was so subtle, so alien in its grace, that Levin's stomach dropped. "Elena, step back!" he hissed, but his voice was swallowed by the cavernous room, absorbed by the strange acoustics, as though the space itself did not wish his warning to carry. She didn't move. Her gaze was locked on the awakening figure. Her lips parted as if she was caught in some silent conversation. Her breathing slowed, unnaturally slow, matching the pulse of the blue light. The creature's head tilted, eyelids sliding open with liquid precision. Levin's breath caught. The eyes weren't eyes at all. They were pools of shifting light, galaxies swirling in miniature, stars flickering like dying embers, collapsing and reforming in eternal silence. The hum sharpened into a sequence of tones. 3 long, 1 short, 1 long again. Levin didn't understand it, but he felt it in his chest, like a coded message burned directly into his nerves. The being's gaze locked onto Elena. She took a step forward, as if pulled by invisible threads. Levin lunged, grabbing her wrist. Her skin was ice cold. She turned her head toward him slowly, her expression unreadable, then whispered something in a voice that wasn't hers. "They've been here, longer than the mountain itself." The remaining 5 figures stirred, their forms swaying in perfect unison. The plates of the floating structure began to close again, sealing the light inside. Yet the hum grew louder, pressing into Levin's skull until it was almost unbearable. And then, a vibration rolled through the ground, deep and resonant, like the shifting of something massive beneath the mountain. Dust drifted from the unseen ceiling above, and somewhere in the darkness, an ancient mechanism groaned to life. This wasn't just a chamber. It was a door. The ground beneath Levin's boots shuddered again, this time with purpose. The groaning in the darkness was no longer distant. It was here, inside the walls, inside the bones of the mountain itself. The glowing plates above their heads sealed shut with a resonant clang, plunging the chamber into near darkness. Only the beings remained illuminated, their bodies casting an unearthly glow that seemed to ripple through the stone around them like light moving through water. And then, the floor cracked. Not shattered, not crumbled, split, as if 2 invisible hands were prying the earth apart with surgical precision. A thin seam of blinding white light broke the darkness, cutting a perfect circle beneath their feet. Elena's breathing became shallow. She clutched Levin's arm so tightly that her nails dug into his skin. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. He did. It wasn't just vibration, it was pull. Something below was drawing them in, an unseen gravity tugging at their bodies, their thoughts, their will. With a slow, grinding motion, the circular section of the floor sank. At first, Levin thought they were descending into another chamber, but the moment the light engulfed them, he realized this was no simple descent. The air was wrong here, weightless, soundless, as if they had been peeled away from the mountain and dropped into a void outside of time. The walls were not rock now, but smooth, translucent surfaces that pulsed faintly, almost like they were alive. Shadows moved inside them, slow, shifting forms that seemed to watch without eyes. Elena's voice broke the silence. "Levin, we're not underground anymore." He turned toward her sharply. "What do you mean? Where else would we be?" She raised her hand toward the wall. Through the translucent surface, far in the distance, he saw stars. Not a handful, but an entire sky, alien and unrecognizable. The chamber they had left was gone. The mountain was gone. They had been taken somewhere else. From behind them, the beings followed silently, their long forms gliding without motion, as though the space bent to carry them. The hum returned, deeper, older, layered with whispers that slipped into the edges of Levin's mind. He couldn't understand the words, but he felt their weight. The pull grew stronger. Ahead, the corridor curved into darkness, and at its end, something massive shifted, something breathing. The corridor stretched endlessly, or so it seemed. Each step Levin and Elena took felt heavier than the last, though no gravity should have pressed upon them here. The stars beyond the translucent walls shifted slowly, swirling like distant galaxies, echoing the pulse of the hum in a rhythm that both terrified and hypnotized them. Ahead, the breathing grew louder. Not human, not mechanical, something ancient, enormous, and alive in a way that defied comprehension. Levin's chest tightened with every inhale. It was impossible to gauge the scale of the presence before them. Then the corridor widened, opening into a vast chamber, darker than anything they had seen. The pale blue glow returned here, emanating from the floor itself, illuminating concentric patterns carved into stone, circles within circles, spirals within spirals, stretching outward in impossible precision. And there, at the center, floated the source of the hum, the being or entity that had called to them from the moment they first set foot among the stones. It was immense, layered in translucent plates like the object they had seen before. But this one moved differently. It shimmered, folded in on itself, and unfolded again. And within its layers, shapes, shadows of figures, frozen mid-motion, suspended in a silent dance that spanned eons. Levin's mind raced. The notebook, the artifacts, the missing Soviet expedition. It all led here. These weren't just stones. These were guardians, archives, experiments, or prisoners. Elena stepped closer, drawn as though by invisible threads. Her eyes glistened in the glow, reflecting patterns that weren't hers to understand. "It's waiting," she whispered, almost to herself. The hum became voice-like, not words, but understanding. "We are the mountain. We are before the mountain. We have waited." The beings shifted slowly, acknowledging them, testing them. Levin felt something deep in his chest. A pull, not of fear, but of memory. Images flashed through his mind. Glaciers forming, forests rising, civilizations crumbling. The stones, the mountains, the world, all layered, nested, waiting. He realized then, Mount Shasta had never been empty. The remote wilderness, the snow, the isolation, they were merely masks. And the ruins, the megaliths, the hidden chamber, they were a bridge to something older than humanity, older than time, and alive. Elena looked at him. Her voice was steady, now, but strange, as if carried on the same current as the entity's thought. "They've been waiting for us, and everyone who comes after." The glow pulsed brighter, and the hum rose to a crescendo, filling every corner of the mind. Levin felt himself dissolving into the rhythm, his consciousness tethered to the ancient intelligence surrounding them. And then, just as suddenly, the pulse stopped. The corridor, the stars, the chamber, all vanished. They were standing again on the snow-covered plain outside the stone monoliths. The storm had cleared. The sky above was calm, empty, normal. The stones loomed silently, larger than life, unbroken, and utterly indifferent. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. Except in their minds, where the memory of what waited beneath, the knowledge of the watchers in the stones, would never leave. Elena turned to Levin. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a new understanding, a terrible wonder. "Some doors," she whispered, "should never be opened. But some doors are never really closed." They gathered their equipment and retreated toward the snowmobiles, the hum and the light gone, leaving only the biting cold and the endless white wilderness. And far above, the peak of Mount Shasta glistened in the sun, serene, silent, and eternal. The mystery of the prehistoric megastructures of Russia, or anywhere hidden in the remote wilderness, was no longer just about stone and ice. It was about presence, memory, and the unknowable intelligence that had shaped them. Even now, somewhere in the wind, faint echoes of the hum carried forward, waiting for the next curious soul brave or foolish enough to follow. They never spoke of what they saw beneath the stones, Not to friends, not to colleagues, not even to each other. But the memory lingered, insistent, like a whisper curling around the edges of thought. The hum of the stones, the pulse of the mountain, the watchers in the shadows. They followed Elena and Levin long after the snow melted and the wilderness returned to silence. Mount Shasta stood above them, serene and eternal, hiding its secrets behind a veil of frost and rock. Travelers passed its slopes, unaware of the ancient intelligence sleeping below, unaware that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. And somewhere, deep in the frozen wilderness, the stones waited, patient, immortal, watching. The world may never know what lies beneath, but the echoes of the prehistoric megastructures and the intelligence that built them still linger, calling to those curious enough to listen. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, some doors are not meant to be opened, and some secrets are older than time itself. Stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, in the remote wilderness, not all that is silent is asleep.